All righty then. Chapter 15, book of Isaiah, verse number uno. The burn against Moab, because in the night Ar of Moab is laid waste and destroyed, because in the night Ker of Moab is laid waste and destroyed. All right, first of all, this Moab, it's gone, so we don't know a whole lot about Moab, but I'm going to tell you, Moab came from Lot's incestuous relationship with his daughter. That's where Moab got its start. So they was in the hole to start with already, okay? Now, the burn of Moab came suddenly. And so it said twice that it would do that, So, what happened was they had pretty much a storm struck their nation. What it was is the Assyrians blew in there and destroyed this nation in a way that's just almost unspeakable. I mean, they didn't leave much rubble when they left out of there, okay? They wiped Moab pretty much off the face of the earth. And so that was the trouble. Now, we're going to see in here, and we talked about it last week, is the lamentations of Moab. Man, that's just the pain and the suffering. That's these storms that was coming to this place. And you're going to see it because it's going to talk about them sackcloth. It's going to talk to them about shaved heads. It's going to talk about shaved beards. And that's what these people did when they were in trouble. They were trying to get God's attention, but they was just playing games. And we'll talk about that a little more. Verse number 2. He has gone up to the temple in Nebaon, to the high places to weep. Moab will wail over Nebo and over Medeba. All their heads will be baldness, and every beard will be cut off. So there's, like I said, there's a lot of mention here about lamentations of these people. Mentioned here, or it talks about this, at one time it does, in one of the deals I was reading. There's a place called Bajith, which is a temple of the Chemosha. Demo is a place east of Jordan where the Moabite stone was found. And the Moabite stone was about one of the only things that left proof that there was a Moab. In the 1840 BC, it was found, and there was the name of a Moabite king that was written on this rock. So it's just kind of one of the proofs that there was a Moab. And so Nebo was the mountain where Moses saw across and saw the promised land. Medeba was a place belonging to Reuben. Reuben was one of the 12 tribes of Israel, but all this stuff was going on. All this stuff belonged to Moab at the time, but it was all destroyed because they said, and the reason why God was so upset with them is they would say they worship God. They were telling everybody that they worship God, but they spent their time in their heathen temples with heathen gods, dedicated to other pagan gods. And the whole time they were saying that they were worshiping the one true and the living God. These people were playing games. And we need to look at that. And when we tell God we're going to do something, we need to do it. It's just like being part of his church. If you're going to be a part of his church, you better be a part really, because God, he can only put up with this playing these games for so long. And I'm going to tell you, God's still God, even today. Now, all this liberalism stuff is going to tell you that he's just a gentle old grandfather that rocks on the rocker on the front porch and he ain't going to hurt nobody no more. Don't you buy into that. And he ain't going to hurt you, but what he does is he'll pull his hands away from you and let you make it on your own. And that's the worst thing you could ever do. The worst thing you could do. If he pulls his hand back from you, that's worse than never having him to start with. Okay? So you just kind of need to be real when we're dealing with God and his church and his kingdom. These people just spent their time in all these heathen temples dedicated to these pagan gods. And like I said, and they just said that, no, we worship God. We worship God. God said, no, I ain't listening to y'all no more. Verse number 3. In their streets they will clothe themselves with sackcloth. On the tops of their houses and in their streets everyone will wail, weeping bitterly. Again, lots of lamenting going on to this day. You know, to this day, anything that's a remnant of Moab, any talk about a Moab, it appears so that we can talk about that this judgment of God, and that this judgment of God is still on them. I read a deal from a guy that was over in this part of the country, and he visited some places and stuff, and it was in this Moabite area, and he said that even in those places today, you still feel like the curse of God is on this place. He said you just feel it when you go in there, that things just still aren't right like they should be in the world today. So this is something that's been ongoing for quite a while. Verse number 4. Heshbon and Eleah will cry out. Their voice shall be heard as far as Jahaz. Therefore the armed soldiers of Moab will cry out. His life will be burdensome to him. Now look, the armed soldiers, these are supposed to be the guys that's all got it pretty good, that the country's taken care of. Because all these little countries, their soldiers and stuff, they pretty much took care of themselves. You know, these are the guys that would come into your house and take all your money and divide it in between themselves. But even in this place, it says the armed soldiers were crying out. Well, this was all getting on them too. So they were having a hard time with all this. More of this lament, more of this judgment that was coming on these people because they weren't listening. They weren't trying to follow God. They were following themselves. This is the same thing we talked about Babylon. You know, they were following themselves. Verse number 5. My heart will cry out for Moab. His fugitives shall flee the Zoar like a 3-year-old heifer. They will go up with weeping for the way of the Horion. They will raise up a cry of destruction. Okay. It says, my heart will cry. Now see, this is Isaiah. Isaiah is just, these people got it so bad. Isaiah is actually feeling kind of sorry for him. His heart's kind of crying out to him right there. But what he says, you know, Moab, though an enemy of Israel, you know, like Isaiah, his heart went out to him because of the terror that's been come upon these people. You know, it's just, he's kind of revealing God's heart because, look, God loves these people too, you know, and God wants them to return to him if they will. If they would turn to him, and we'll get to that a little bit, so if they'd turn to him, you know, and do what they're supposed to do, he'd straighten it all out. And these people would say, oh, yeah, sure, and then they wouldn't do nothing. They just wouldn't do it. Verses 6 through 9. For the waters of Nimrim will be desolate, for the green grass has withered away. The grass fails, there is nothing green. Therefore, the abundance they have gained and what they have laid up, they will carry away to the brook of the willows. For the cry has gone out all around the borders of Moab. It's wailing to Elgim. It is wailing in Beer Elim. For the waters of Dimon will be full of blood, because I will bring more upon Dimon, lines upon him who escapes from Moab and on the remnant of the land. So all these places are right there around where we're talking about. And every one of them, there's a destruction coming to them because they're part of this Moabite deal, you know. And it says even those people that think they're going to get away, I'm going to send the lines to get them, you know. You're not getting out of this. You people are going to pay, you know, for all of this stuff. Details vividly of the destruction and the further ravaging of the land of Moab, you know. All of it also to be literally fulfilled. I mean, this is just like, this isn't some fancy speech. These are point blank things. God said, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this. Okay? So it just ain't looking good for these people. All right? And then we're going to go into chapter 16. And chapter 16 is the last call for Moab to avail herself, you know, to the mercy of God. This is God's going to give them like one more chance to come clean, okay? Verse number 1. Send the lamb to the ruler of the land, from Selah to the wilderness, to the mount of the daughter of Zion. All right, so what they're telling them is, send us a lamb, a sacrificial lamb, okay? Which is the same thing. A sacrificial lamb describes who? He's wanting them to send a great sacrifice for what they've been doing. By doing this, Moab would signify that they recognize God, the God of Israel. They did not send a lamb. They wanted to be religious without recognizing there was a higher power in charge, and they did not want to admit to being sinners in the sight of God, which was truly their greatest sin. So they're still paying the price for this. Verses 2, 3, and 4. For it shall be as a wandering bird thrown out of the nest, so it shall be the daughters of Moab at the fords of the Arnon. Take counsel, execute judgment, make your shadow like the night in the middle of the day. Hide the outcast, do not betray him who escapes. Let my outcasts dwell with you, O Moab, be a shelter to them for the face of the spoiler. For the extortioner is at an end, devastation ceases, the oppressors are consumed out of the land. What it says there is these people are all going to flee. Things are falling apart. They're falling apart fast. These people are going to try to get out of there. They're going to be just like little birds kicked out of a nest. They're going to go to the rivers. They're going to go to the prairies. They're going to go to everything to try to get away from all this stuff. But what he's telling them there is he says, my outcasts dwell with you. He said, no, y'all are going to stay right here. Y'all going to pay the price for what y'all been doing. It ain't none of this running away business, okay? And it's to be a shelter for them from the face of the spoiler, is that, they're going to think that it's going to be okay, and they're going to find confidence in themselves, which is what they've already been doing, but it's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen for them, okay? They're trying to escape, but this lament that was upon them just goes on because of, in the pursuit of these idols, these false gods that they're after. The people are scattering. Like I said, they're trying to outrun their problems, which is what we try to do anyway. Instead of fixing stuff, we just try to avoid it. That's what they're trying to do here. Verse number 5. In mercy the throne will be established, and one will sit on it in truth in the tabernacle of David, judging and seeking justice and hastening righteousness. It's just saying God's going to have his way. This is some stuff that comes out of it. It's mentioned the same way in James chapter 15 and, about being in the tabernacle of David. That tabernacle of David had fallen down, but it was going to be rebuilt, and that things were going to be the same. It's just like letting these people know, hey, look, y'all may be getting away from something, but y'all ain't going to get away from it for long. You need to read the handwriting that's on the wall here, things will, things are going to be set right again, and y'all going to have to get right or get gone, I guess is the way to say it. They're going to have to make amends for what they're doing. Verse number 6. We have heard the pride of Moab. He is very proud of his haughtiness and his pride and his wrath, but his lies shall not be so. All this punishment is and the way these people were acting, we ought to have a really great clue to what the main problem with these people is, and it's pride. They had all this pride in themselves. Same thing that was going on with Babylon. Same stuff that happened with Babylon, And so the pride that they had in man caused them to reject God. But if they would accept God, He's chasing after them now, because that's what God does. God said, He would have delivered them. That's what He said, man. If y'all would just send me a lamb to show me that y'all were serious about changing, I'll cover you. I'll take care of it. But no, they wouldn't do it. Okay, we're going to read verses 7 through 12 here. Therefore Moab shall wail for Moab, everyone shall wail. For the foundations of Kir Hashereth you shall mourn. Surely they are stricken. For the fields of Heshbon languish, and the vine of Sibmah. The lords of the nations have broken down its choice plants, which have reached to Jazer and wandered through the wilderness. Her branches are stretched out. They are gone over the sea. Therefore I will bewail the vine of Sibmah at the weeping of Jazer. I will drench you with my tears, O Heshbon and Elai. For battle cries have fallen over your summer fruits and your harvest. See, nothing's working out for these people. Gladness is taken away and joy from the plentiful field. In the vineyards there will be no singing, nor will there be shouting. No treaders will tread out wine on the presses. I have made their shouting cease. Therefore my heart shall resound like a harp for Moab, and my inner being for Kir-Heriz. And it shall come to pass, when it is seen that Moab is weary on the high place, that he will come to his sanctuary to pray, but he will not prevail. It's just like, even if y'all do something, y'all are just going to do too little too late, is what it's telling us there. Like Babylon, Moab's problem again was their pride and all of this stuff. They were much smaller than Babylon, and these folks boasted over, nothing. Really, this pride led to their destruction and their downfall, and this lament and all this wailing turned into, everything that was a sound in that place at one time turned into a funeral dirge or a funeral march, because these people were just not doing right. Like it said, the vineyard, there was nobody pressing grapes. The vineyards were trampled down, unharvested. Everything was unfruitful. We start to see more of the grief of Israel, over all this destruction. Even in the book of Ezekiel, in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 33, it says, I have no pleasure in the death of the wicked. So God wasn't trying to kill these people. He's still trying to help them. But man, they just not listening. And that's us sometimes, I think. I think sometimes when we get off track and we get in trouble, I know in my life sometimes when I was doing wrong and somebody tried to tell me right, I just didn't want to hear right. It's just like, look, just leave me alone. I'm gonna be in misery in my own company. I don't want to hear what's right because I don't want to do what's right. And that's kind of where these people were at that time. Isaiah could have been rejoicing, but instead he wept over these people. In the book of Proverbs, chapter 24, it talks about him weeping over these people. He was not there happy to deliver this message to these people, y'all. His heart was pretty tore up for him because he was watching all the suffering that was going on. And it was so easy to fix, like most of our stuff is, if we just do it. Verses 13 and 14. This is the word which the Lord has spoken concerning Moab since that time. But now the Lord has spoken, saying, within 3 years, as the years of a hired man, the glory of Moab will be despised, with all that great multitude, and the remnant will be very small. When it talks about the hired man, it's like when you hired a guy for a contract, or you took him on a contract, it was usually a 3-year deal that he was there, okay? And so that's what it's talking about there. I mean, in dealing with these nations and having to do with Israel, God used a calendar. He said 3 years. He used a timeline, But never did he do that when he was dealing with the church. Y'all ever notice that? He never used a timeline when he dealt with the church. But these nations and the warning of their destruction was at the hand of Assyria, that this judgment was due to them, and for their not wanting to recognize God called them, their pride, and this, he basically keeps telling them over and over, this is your fault, this is how you fix it, this is your fault, this is how you fix it. They wouldn't listen. They just wouldn't listen. This is the same problem that old Lucifer had, in heaven. He wanted to put himself higher than God. He wanted to build his own kingdom independent of God. So here's where this stuff comes in, and you look at the way that these people did and that they wanted to do their own thing, and you look at this and you think, well, what do I compare that to today? And I tell you what I have to compare it to is liberal theology. These people read the Bible, but then they determine it means what they want it to mean and not what it says. You know, and that's exactly what these people were doing. That's exactly what Lucifer did in heaven. That's exactly what Moab was doing. It's exactly what Babylon did, you know. And so, you know, that's exactly what people are doing today. So what do we call it today? Liberal theology, you know. It's just, hey, you read the Bible and then you determine what it says, you know. We just follow you, you know. Me and Bill was just talking about that earlier. If you're not following God, the only thing you got to follow is man, and man will lead you astray in a heartbeat, you know. So, these people were going to do it themselves and save themselves. That's what they thought. I mean, judgment came to Moab. You know, Moab was just a little out of the way nation. It wasn't a big deal. But now, because of their pride, and they're turning their back, the whole nation turning their back on God and lying to God, saying we do worship you, but they didn't, you know. Moab pretty much, if it wasn't in the Bible today, it'd be entirely forgotten. This is the only reason anybody even knows that there used to be a Moab, because it was in the Bible, you know. And I think that still has a message for us, you know, today as a people. And I think that we ought to take God a whole lot more serious than we do most of the time, you know. I think sometimes it's easiest to think about, you know, well, God, he don't work that way no more. Look, God work how he want to. You hear me? God work how he want to. He ain't got to ask nobody's permission either. He don't care what your idea is either, you know. He can do it his own way. He can do it gently, or he can do it with that shepherd's staff, with that rod of correction. I mean, you know, so I think when we give ourselves to Christ, when we call ourselves by his name, I think people need to be a little bit more serious about that than most of us are. And I will say most of us are today. Because I think there's sometimes, you know, I don't think things through. There's things that I do that I consider what I want to do, and I'm not considering the ways of the Lord. And I think that if you can catch yourself doing that, I think you're way ahead of the game if you actually catch yourself doing that and try to fix it, because I think too many people are missing the whole deal, and they just keep doing the wrong after the wrong after the wrong. So, you know. Anyway, that finishes up chapter 16, so we got 15 and 16 knocked out tonight. You guys online, that's where we're going to finish up tonight. Thank y'all for being here with us. Hope y'all all have a great Thanksgiving. Come and see us sometime. Come see us on Wednesday nights, eat supper with us. You know, come to Bible study with us and prayer meeting. Other than that, you guys be blessed. Be careful if you got to travel.